Hello and welcome to episode number 277. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. You're listening to one of our premium episodes, so thank you very much for your support of the Project Management Podcast. I have another great interview with David Blumhorst from Daptive for you. Of course, we continue on the theme of project portfolio management. This time we are looking at how a PPM tool can help you ensure that you are not trying to kill your company by introducing too much change. The basic premise here is that PPM leaders must take into account the amount of change a business can undergo in any given period. And if they don't keep this amount of change below the acceptable threshold, change fatigue will ensue and stifle the company. So, how much change is in your portfolio?
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview.
Today with David Blumhorst, Vice President of Solutions and Services at Daptive.
David, thank you very much for coming back on the program today.
Thank you, Cornelius. Nice to be with you again.
We learned from our last conversations, projects are meant to change something about how we do business. For example, we do business in a certain way today, and in order to change this way, we initiate a project. Is this still what you see, what's happening out there in the business world?
Absolutely, and even more so than we used to. I think as companies view projects more and more as investments, rather than taking just any good idea that comes up and saying, oh yeah, that sounds good, let's fund that and let's see, if it works, they're putting it through a lens that says, is this aligned with our strategic objectives? Is this going to accomplish a business outcome we want to accomplish? And looking at the 120 we have this quarter versus the 20 we can do, let's decide on that basis which ones go forward. So very much it's about what kind of an improvement, what kind of a change, whether it's improving revenue or improving employee or customer satisfaction. What are we looking to see here? And putting a filter on the projects that are coming in based on the business outcomes. So very much so.
Before we can jump into the main topic of this conversation, I need a definition from you. What is change fatigue?
So change fatigue is a very interesting topic, and I'm not an organizational change management professional. I have those on my staff. But I get it a little more viscerally. Think of it as you can only handle so many new things at once. So, for instance, a little one would be a little bit of a humorous one. I was at a company where we moved buildings. The building next door we moved to was identical in floor plan in every way to the building we moved out of. Cubicles were in the same places. Our offices were in the same places. All of that was exactly the same, which is an easy change to make, except that for some reason, in this floor plan, the men's and women's restrooms were flipped. Even though they were in the same places, they were flipped. You can imagine people had to think a few times before they decided which door to go in, and they did think every time because, the risk of extreme embarrassment was there. But that kind of a change causes you to think. If you now think about, say, putting in an ERP system, and you're changing fundamentally the way you do work. And a good example of this is I was at a company where we went literally from QuickBooks to PeopleSoft, of all things. So one day on a Friday, you're working in QuickBooks, and you're shipping, and you're printing stuff out and all that kind of stuff. And then Monday morning, you're working in PeopleSoft. And I get a call that it's, we're having problems shipping out the door. And the shipping clerk actually calls me up, gets filtered all the way up to me as the CIO and says, I can't ship anything. Well, what's it saying? Well, it's saying there's a credit hold. Did you call the credit department? Well, no. So I called them up. Sure enough, that customer hadn't paid their bill in 6 months. So it was on a credit hold for a reason. So the system was working, but the employee was having to go through an entirely different process. You pile too many of those on top of each other, and we tend to get frustrated. We tend to resist. We tend to say, this isn't working for me. And then we'll blame the tool. We'll blame the new process. We'll blame something. That is essentially, in a more visceral way, change fatigue. Too many changes piled on top of each other taxes our capacity as humans to do that change. We're not machines that can just be programmed and take instructions and suddenly go a different direction. We have to be able to process this stuff. So that's essentially it.
What exactly happens if an organization starts too many projects that bring too many such changes?
It starts grinding to a halt, frankly. You notice that those changes don't take hold. You wonder why shipping has slowed down. You wonder why order processing has slowed down. Since shipping is a bottleneck, now the orders aren't coming in. As a matter of fact, they're going through changes too. So things really start to slow down. It can affect company performance in some pretty large ways. So this idea of change fatigue and this idea of launching too many things at once is very real. It really can impact, it's not just fluffy woo-woo stuff. It really can impact an organization's performance in some profound ways.
How difficult is it to reverse this process?
Well, obviously it's easier if you don't introduce it. Reversing it's another thing.
Yeah.
An example, actually, of not introducing it, I was at a company where we were putting in an all-new IT architecture, and my applications director came to me. We had this thing called a project landing map, which shows all the projects that are going on and diamonds for when their go-lives are. I saw them all lining up at one spot in May of this year. I said, we can't do that. He said, oh, no, we'll be ready. I said, I know technically that you will have all the applications ready to turn on. We cannot do that to the company or it'll just fall over. We won't be able to get anything done. And so we moved some things around to pace that change out a little bit more so we didn't fall into that change fatigue, if you will. Reversing, it's a different matter. Another company I went to had introduced a very large new SDLC and made everyone adopt it. Infrastructure, applications, web development. Absolutely everyone was adopting it. And what we found there was a huge resistance on the part of project managers. They were saying, I can't handle all this change at once. It's a huge new thing I'm trying to do. Matter of fact, I heard one project manager say, I don't do anything but gather signatures anymore. I don't manage projects, I gather signatures. What I did is I said, okay, we need to start streamlining this thing out. But before we start streamlining it out, I started having brown bags every Wednesday for lunch, brought in lunch. You guys give me feedback, project managers give me feedback, and we will change the methodologies accordingly. So the real key to reversing that kind of change fatigue then is getting folks involved in making the changes that will work for them. Now, often you get into the change fatigue by not having taken that into account in the first place. So getting folks involved at the ground level, getting folks involved that are feeling the change fatigue, and then figuring out what can we do quickly to try to take some of this load off can help that a lot. But it's not easy, frankly.
In your opening statement, you said that now more than ever, companies are initiating projects. They're not just initiating more projects, they're also initiating them at a much faster pace. So how do you balance this constant need to initiate projects that make a change versus change fatigue?
Balancing them out is a good thing to look at. So a lot of changes aren't necessarily big changes for the staff, if you will, for the human side of us. If we do a lot of work in infrastructure, when you come into work on Monday morning and the internet is suddenly moving faster and you're able to download forms faster, no one's going to complain and no one's going to feel any fatigue. They'll just feel very grateful. So there are a lot of changes that actually happen, a lot of improvements in the business that are accepted very readily. It's a matter of not piling on too many changes that are big, that really cause us to change our workflows, our work habits, the way we think about our work too much at the same time. So you can still do a lot of projects and make a lot of progress. The other thing is if you've set it up ahead of time so that you have worked with the people that are going to be affected by the change, communicated that change properly, gotten them involved in planning and implementing the change itself, then when it's ready to go, they will absorb it easier. They will adopt to it easier. And then I think the third thing is recognizing that when you launch a project and go live, say you've put in a new ERP system like we do with PeopleSoft one time, when I put in PeopleSoft at this one company, That is not the end of the project. For your users, it's the start. That's when they first get a hold of the tool. You need to have plans in place to help them through that adoption curve, because the Monday morning when they come in, their job is going to be harder than it was the Friday when they left. So making sure you've got a good plan to help sustain them in adopting this change going forward is a very important piece of this.
Can we determine a threshold for this? I mean, can we figure out how much change can be implemented and absorbed by our organization?
Yeah, when people start toppling over at their desks and going out for drinks early, you know you've crossed the threshold. Joking aside, each company is different that way. Entrepreneurial, smaller companies will naturally change very fast and very often and have a much higher threshold for change. Large legacy mainline type companies are going to go a lot slower. So you need to take the organization type into account. You need to take its culture into account. Is it one that is very process and policy driven, has been around for 30? I mean, example, this is we were putting in a PPM, new processes for a PPM when I was doing PPM consulting at a pretty large company. And they were having a hard time adopting the change because they had people that had been working there 30 years. I've done it this way for 30 years. I don't want to change how I'm doing it. It's worked for 30 years. Well, you know, you're not that competitive as that company anymore if you haven't changed. You got to stay on top of things. So that company is going to have a much smaller threshold for change. You're going to want to change things one at a time, and introduce that change properly with all the communication plans and learning tools and all that kind of stuff, so that they buy into it. Whereas a startup that is looking to take the world by storm, they're just going to follow your lead a whole lot easier and a whole lot faster.
How does a project portfolio management tool, a PPM tool like Adaptive, help me understand how much change we can implement in our organization?
Yeah, so I mentioned one of my favorite tools for that, actually. It's called the Project Landing Map. Get it out of a PPM tool like Adaptive. Being able to line up all the go lives or all the change incidents, if you will, calendar style across a Gantt helps you see where the overlaps are and where they're going to be falling on top of each other. That allows you to
so
spread
we're
them out.
talking about a visual actually, where
graphic.
I can see, almost like a scatter diagram with lots of dots.
Think of it like a Gantt chart. Okay. So you've got the months across the horizontal on the top, and you've got the projects listed on the left.
Yep.
And you've got these diamonds placed in those months for each release or each go live for each project. You can now look vertically at, say, 1 month and go, how many of those diamonds are lining up this month?
And you got where the cluster is, that's where your problem's going to be.
Where the cluster is, that's where your problems are going to be. Yes, exactly. And if you can then take a look at the size of those changes, these are some easy infrastructure things they can absorb, not a problem. But in the case I was talking about, it was we're putting in, some new ERP functionality, some middleware that's going to cause some process changes, some new CRM functionality, and some new Salesforce automation functionality all at the same time. I was like, there's no way.
Yep. Overall, is the problem of introducing too much and change fatigue, is that well understood by management?
No. Not nearly enough. Change management, I think, is still thought of as the fuzzy side of the business, the people side of the business, the human, fluffy kind of thing in the business. And it's not understood that without it, a lot of these changes are going to fail. I mean, how many project failures, not by time, budget, and scope, but by business result, occurred because people didn't adopt the change? How often do we get to a year later and hear people saying, why haven't they changed their behaviors? We gave them new instructions. We gave them a new way to do it. Why don't they just do it? Because people are people. They are not machines. We have an emotional side. As a matter of fact, our emotional side makes our decisions more than our rational side. Lots of psychological research to back this up, but it's put in change management with a great analogy of, you've got someone riding an elephant. The rider is your logical brain saying, you need to go here, you need to go there. If that elephant, which is our emotional side, decides they're going somewhere else, I'm thirsty, I'm going for the water, not down the path you're taking me, guess where you're going? So Change management is about understanding the human side of this and making sure those humans adopt. If you do that, the change gets absorbed much faster and you can move on to the next change. So you can change faster and more continuously if you take that human side into account instead of just thinking we're a bunch of automatons that can be given instructions and we change. And by the way, if we were a bunch of automatons that can be given instructions and can change, we could just do this with robots instead of humans who have wonderful, warm human brains that can make good subjective calls when they need to in the middle of these processes. This isn't a mechanized thing, a company. It's humans making a lot of decisions that make a company go. So it's real important to take that human aspect into account.
I have a quote for you from Gartner. Gartner says, PPM leaders must prepare for extreme transformation or prepare new resumes. What do they mean by that? And do PPM leaders have to be afraid now?
Some do. The PPM leaders that still think that a PMO is a glorified project management exercise, and that someone who can manage, just someone who's good at managing a project and manage a whole bunch of projects, missed the point of PPM. PPM is a strategic practice that allows us to align our investments with our objectives and evaluates those investments and makes sure those investments work, that the changes work, things like that. So a PPM leader is one that understands it is a strategic business position, and they are prepared simply by their mindset, basically, because they'll be asking the right business questions. They'll be going the right direction to handle the extreme transformation. We're transforming PMOs from project management offices really to portfolio management offices and strategic portfolio management offices more and more. So I think that's what they really have to look at, that they need to be prepared for that kind of a transformation. Also, PMO is moving out of IT and into enterprise PMO, business unit PMOs. Enterprise PMOs are purely strategic PMOs. They run the large programs that affect change across, entire companies often. And then our businesses are changing rapidly. We are in the internet age more and more. Business moves at the pace of the internet, and we change our businesses around frequently. Another form of extreme transformation.
To close, let's see how we can help our listeners with this. So, first of all, what are some of the signs that show us we're trying to introduce too much change, especially if you don't have Adaptive in your organization where you can just push the button and you see that map?
Other than people drinking on the job, I joke about that a little bit. You will notice people showing up late, leaving early. You will notice them doing things the old way, if you will, instead of adopting the new way. They will be less enthusiastic, and you can just see it in your workforce for the most part. If you've done change management right, you've gotten them excited about what's coming. They're following your vision. They're excited about what the new change is. They're energized, and they're trying to go after a vision or a target, and that target being that business goal you're trying to go after. If they are not, if they're lagging, if they're unenthusiastic, if they're spending their time in the cafeteria talking instead of getting to what they need to do, then what you probably are looking at is you've either put too much change on or you have gone about the change in a way that dehumanized them instead of empowering them, frankly.
These seem to be soft signs that can be easily missed because, sometimes your gut is not really connected to your brain all that much. So where can we get maybe some hard information, some numbers, if we don't have a PPM tool like Adaptive in our organization?
Well, it's always harder without a PPM tool, of course. Because what you're trying to do is gather data. Gathering survey data from employees on various aspects of employee satisfaction is a good thing to do. Gathering survey data on those specific changes that you've made. Going and talking to them to see what might be getting in the way, what's working, what's not working, about the new system, about how you've gone about it, about all the changes that have been made. Have we introduced too much new stuff into your daily job in the last 6 months? Going and talking to them, and then having specific questions that you're asking each of them so you can write down the results of that and put that in a form that you can look at data-wise is probably one of the best ways to do it. I think it's best to gather those results in something like a PPM tool so you can then look at the data, roll up the data, and get some results from that. But essentially you're looking to, in a consistent way, gather that soft data and quantify it, if you will, and take a look at it.
And how do we avoid this in the first place? I want to avoid fatigue, change fatigue, say a year from now. What do I need to do now?
So the opposite of being fatigued is being energized. You can do a lot with a company that's energized. And you can do a lot of change with a company that is energized. If you paint a good vision of where you're going, and now let's bring this to PPM view again. I've got a list of 100-something projects, but I've got 8 strategic objectives I'm going after. We've told the company what the 8 strategic objectives are. We have gotten them excited about the direction. Think of Google with organizing the world's information or something like that. We've got that message down and everyone's going, yeah, I want to go after that target. They are then going to see, when we sort and list which projects we're going to take on, that, yeah, all those projects are going after that big target, even if they have their own individual targets. Now they're all rowing in the same direction toward that target. They're going to be working on those projects to introduce that change. If you're then working the change management properly with each project, they are going to be energized when they get to that go live point, rather than dreading and worried and things like that. So really the way to avoid change fatigue isn't to do a whole lot less. It's to, in the first place, get them energized, get them motivated, get them bought in behind the target so that they all go after it. There was a good saying I saw in one of the Gartner presentations this week. It said, it's difficult to herd cats, but they will hunt together. If you try to give them just all little piece part instructions like you would program a computer, they'll kind of go off and do their old thing because they've been used to doing it, or do something else, and they won't be coordinated. If you give them a target to hunt after, they will almost self-organize and go after that target. So providing that vision and that target, helping them with motivation, empowering them to go after it, I think leads to an energized change effort, an energized project team trying to do to get to that project goal, if you will. And then you don't have fatigue at all. You have a lot of excitement.
David, once again, it has been a pleasure having had you on the program today.
Thank you, Cornelius. A pleasure being here. Nice talking to you again.
And that was Daptive's David Bloomhorst on change fatigue and how to avoid introducing too much change in your company. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. But if you're a PMP or a PGMP and you need some PDUs, well, why not try our sister podcast, the PDU podcast? You'll get a new webinar and at least one new PDU every month, completely on autopilot. Stop by at pducast.com. That's pducast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. Anything that can be changed will be changed until there is no time left to change anything. Until next time.